Print page 1 to begin and use the little scale at the top here to measure either 1 centimetre or 1 inch. If that measures correctly, you can print the remaining 5 pages. The sewing pattern is cut up into 2 segments. You'll have pages 1, 2, 3 that connect, which will create one glove, and then pages 4, 5, 6 will connect to create the other glove. As you can see here, I am cutting the right hand side of that border so that I can overlap the page so that these 2 little corners can touch, creating an X. So here I am sliding in that folded sewing pattern to encase the fabric. I made sure that I got it as close as possible, and I opened up the pattern as well to make sure it was right on that fold line. Now, as we move on to pinning the pattern into the fabric, make sure that you add as many pins as you think you need. More is better for this because the fabric is prone to slipping. I myself put a pin in each finger because as you cut down each finger, they end up moving around a little bit. So to get a nice close cut, pin each one down. I really recommend that when you go down to cut between each of the fingers, you then come back to it again with a finer, sharper pair of scissors and pull back each one of those fingers, making sure you're snipping down all the way to the base. I then overlay the fabric over the sewing pattern and use my mini scissors to cut a little notch out of the fabric, where I then grab my bigger scissors and cut out the little hole which will be for our thumb later. Now this step is optional, but I do strongly recommend it, which is popping a little bit of baking paper underneath this part of the sewing pattern. What we're going to be doing here is cutting out the fabric that we need for the thumb section of the glove, and the reason for this is because when you try to backstitch on such a small piece of fabric, it'll end up getting stuck in your sewing machine. So having a little bit of baking paper attached gives it some support so that you can get the stitch work done nice and neatly. So here I am just measuring the section of where the stitch stops. So I placed the fabric back on top to use as a reference, and I popped one pin in from where the sewing will start, and then I add another pin in using that little line as reference as to where the stitch will end. Now here we are cutting out the segment of fabric that sits between each of your fingers. If you have a look, you can see that it curves down. This is to account for the ends of your fingertips, which are naturally smaller, so that we get a nice tapered fit. Now keep in mind this sewing pattern was designed to be sewn with a narrow foot, so ensure that you're changing over to a narrow sewing foot so that you are getting the perfect side seam allowance. So here I am creating that thumb section of the glove, and there I am using that little reference point, and that is where I'm going to stop sewing. Now, as you can see, because we used thinner paper, it's much easier to just rip and remove, and we were able to keep the natural shape of the fabric without it getting stuck. With that done, you want to make sure that you turn it inside out and you try it onto your thumb and make sure that it's a good fit. Some fabrics are going to naturally be thinner or thicker, which will change the stretch. So just try that and see if it fits well for your finger. Now we're going to attach this onto the rest of the fabric. Make sure that the fabric has been turned out and you pop that through the little hole like I have done here. So attach that top corner to the top corner of that hole, and then you'll do that as well to the bottom. This was exceptionally tricky to sew, but I do really recommend adding pins all around the circumference of that hole to make it easier for yourself later when you sew it, because it is such a tight little gap. So make sure you do this nice and slow, and I really do recommend grabbing some tweezers to make sure that that fabric is overlapping perfectly and is nice and flat. After you've done that, pop that back on your thumb, see how it fits, and if you're happy, you can proceed. So here we are applying that thin segment in between the fingers. And I really do recommend using tweezers again to make sure it is nice and flush to the edge. Now this bit is probably the fiddliest bit of this sewing pattern, attaching this on. So the best way I can explain it is that top layer of fabric, you're always going to want to keep it running straight. And the only thing that you are rotating is the bottom layer of fabric. So you'll just have to continually be lifting up that foot to rotate the under layer and keep that top one straight. You're likely going to need to slow down even more when you get to the fingertip section of the fabric, but so long as you're just slowly rotating, you will be fine. And after that first finger is done, you can just repeat that exact same steps for the remaining fingers. Now having a look at this index finger and the pinky finger in the top right hand corner, you can see that they have a really nice triangular shape and they taper out really nicely. So as we come to the sewing part here, this is the pinky. We're folding it over so the top is flush and we're pretty much ignoring that extra fabric segment that goes between the fingers. But then we're bringing it back in, making sure that segment is now flush with the other side. Then you will just continue to repeat the same steps that you did earlier. Now here we are at the index finger, and we want to make sure we have that nice triangular shape again, tapering out. So if you can have a look, you can see that so far the edges are flush, but we're going to follow a line straight up to the top and cut out that excess for that nice triangle. After you've closed that side seam, bring your fabric back in and make sure you're closing off the top of the pinky finger, which we didn't do earlier. If you can see here, I'm following the natural shape of the pinky, doing a nice curved line around. I then got my scissors and just trimmed away any excess that I had, especially that little triangular bit that I no longer need. And then you can turn that bad boy inside out and you should have a lovely pair of gloves. That is the end of the tutorial. I hope that was helpful. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you get notified when I release new videos, because I offer 20% off discount codes for my sewing patterns for the first 48 hours when I release a video. So yeah, may as well use it. So yeah, please comment below if you have any questions or if I can help you with anything. Otherwise, good luck with your project.